This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. On Monday, the news broke that the Republican National Committee is debating a new platform proposed by Donald Trump that purports to soften the party's positions on abortion and same-sex marriage. The new language is being debated this week. This will be widely interpreted as a savvy move by the Trump campaign, an effort to woo swing voters and suburban women alienated by the GOP's anti-choice stance. But what if it's better understood as an expression of fear? That is, worry that the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the horrors that has unleashed will remain a major problem for Trump and the GOP this fall. Today we're discussing this with Jess McIntosh, a Democratic strategist who has spent many years defending reproductive rights. We're going to talk about what it says that Trump is taking this step, why it's a scam, and how Democrats can make sure voters know that. Great to have you on, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's awesome to talk to you. It's been a minute.
It has been a while. A lot has happened since we talked last. But
the world was so much more normal the last time we got lunch like 10 years ago. It just felt like I had a handle on everything, and now I don't.
Yeah, I sure don't feel like I have a handle on anything. Okay, in 2016 and 2020, Trump ran on a GOP platform that called for a constitutional amendment protecting embryos and fetuses and a national ban on abortion, with some exceptions, after 20 weeks. But now, the new language nixes talk of the amendment and national ban, though it does include language affirming that under the 14th Amendment, states can ban the procedure. This is reportedly angering anti-abortion activists right now. What's your immediate reaction to it and the politics of it all?
It's a scam. Donald Trump has tried to have this issue every single way it can be had. But there's the rhetoric and then there's the reality, right? And the rhetoric is all over the map, and it always has been. You know, he will, out of one side of his mouth, say that there needs to be punishment for a woman who seeks an abortion, and out of the other side say that he understands why somebody might make that kind of decision. He's absolutely lying in order to make his extremely draconian agenda palatable to the vast majority of Americans. We have learned now in a post-Dobbs world what it means to leave abortion rights up to the states. We know the horrors that happen when that happens. And it's not just the horrors, you know, it's sad to say, like, aside from the 10-year-old rape victims who are forced to carry a pregnancy to term, but aside from the horrors, you know, women who work can't travel from state to state. You know, I have a lot of friends in their late 30s right now, and they're very concerned about where they're taking their summer vacations this year. Like, we got people who have embryos in various states that they don't think is safe to keep anymore. There are people making all kinds of decisions that have nothing to do with the worst of the worst stories, which clearly trickle out. But there are mundane stories that throw lives into confusion happening every single day. And that is why whenever you see this on the ballot, people vote overwhelmingly in favor of having access to abortion. They do that in Montana, they do that in Kansas, they do it in red states, blue states. It is across the board. This is about as close to a consensus issue as we have in America. And that sounds super counterintuitive because all we hear is how wedge issue it is, how controversial it is. But more people agree on this than just about anything else. And once the reality is confronting them, that becomes very obvious. So of course, Donald Trump is afraid of what he has done and being held accountable for it.
I want to return to all that in a second, but first, the language of the platform also removes language that condemns the Supreme Court decision enshrining a right to same-sex marriage. I'll tell you what I take from all this. Trump really wants to win. We often talk about how Trump is surrounded by whack job MAGA cultist types and so forth. But the reality is he also has these very hard-boiled GOP operatives working for him, like, I don't know, campaign manager Chris LaCivita, for instance. These are the moves of a campaign that knows it has real vulnerabilities on these fronts and is protecting a flank, don't you think? I mean, you've been involved in these battles for a long time against the right. These are people who recognize they have a problem and are moving to deal with it, correct?
100%. They are seeing the same numbers that our side does. We know how popular access to abortion is. And like, even more than access to abortion being popular, abortion bans are very, very unpopular. You know, if you ask America whether or not they support abortion, depending on how you phrase that question, the answer is going to come back somewhere between 60 and 85% yes. That's a pretty big swing, right? 60 to 85%, depending on how I ask the question. If I ask the question, are you in favor of abortion bans? It comes back about 6 to 8%. That's not quite the same swing. Literally everybody agrees they don't want politicians should not have anything to do with this issue. So regardless of how you feel about this issue, and lots of people feel lots of ways, most of us are all unified in the thought that politicians should not be making this decision. And Donald Trump knows that. And more importantly, so do the very smart GOP operatives who work around him on behalf of maintaining power at all costs. They understand this. And so you can't really go back on, what you've done. So you'd better lie about what you're going to do. But he's the reason why Roe v. Wade was overturned, and he bragged about it. He told us he was going to do it, he did it, and then he told us he did it. I don't see a pivot opportunity here for him.
I want to ask you a little bit more about this idea that abortion bans in particular are very unpopular. I think, obviously, Trump wants to be able to say the states decide the issue, period, and then have the door closed on the issue, right? He thinks he can just close the door. But what we're looking at is bans in state after state and the consequences of bans. And by the way, the Republican Party, whatever Trump dictates in terms of platform language, supports a national ban on abortion. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind that if Trump were reelected, that A, a Republican Congress, if he got one, would send him a national abortion ban of some kind, and B, that he'd sign it?
Right. Just imagine the world in which Republican President Donald Trump vetoes the national abortion ban that is sent by a Republican-controlled Congress. You cannot imagine that world because it simply doesn't exist. Let's be really clear about what he has stated he will do. He has stated that he will sign a national abortion ban. He has stated that he will ban sending mifepristone in the mail, and I know a lot of people don't really get what that means. If you make it illegal, right, to send the pills that cause abortion, which is the vast majority of abortions happen at home with medication, you don't even have to go to the doctor. If you make those pills, the sending or procuring of them illegal, what you have done is create a total abortion ban in America. The only people who would be able to have one are those who needed medical intervention in a hospital if they happened to be in a state that still allowed that. But if I'm sitting here in New York and I find out I'm pregnant very early in my first trimester, like we all hope we would, and I'm able to talk to my doctor can't prescribe what she would want to for me in that moment because those things are now illegal. So I would, I guess, have to wait. I'm not really sure, actually, what would happen at that point. And that's kind of the point. The vagueness of these laws make doctors self-police. They make hospitals self-police. When you have a state that isn't sure whether or not they're allowed to save a woman's life if she's miscarrying, because the way to do that is a procedure that looks a lot like abortion, then it's up to the hospital. It's up to the doctor themselves. Like, am I going to risk my career should I wait till this woman gets a little sicker? Like, the laws are vague on purpose. Sometimes we read them and we're like, wow, they really don't know what they're talking about. And that is also the truth. But the vagueness serves a point. The confusion serves a point. So if on the one hand, he's saying, I'm going to ban abortion bills, I'm going to have a national ban. And on the other hand, he's saying, I'm going to leave this up to the states, and all I care about is abortion later term. That's going to confuse things, and that's on purpose. Confusion makes people police themselves. That's honestly what you need to do when you are on the wrong side of a very popular issue. You can't police everybody yourself. You need people to start doing it themselves, and that's what's going to happen if he's allowed to keep talking out of every single side of his mouth.
It's very hard for him to simply say, let the states decide and then duck the issue for another reason, right? Because it opens the door to the very worst designs that some of these reactionary red state legislatures have in their sights. These places are, real cesspools of reactionary rule in some cases. And when Trump was questioned recently by Time magazine about states prosecuting women who seek abortions, he didn't know how to answer it. He knew he couldn't slam the door on it exactly, so he suggested he was open to it. So what I take from that is that Trump can be made to own all these true implications that you're talking about of the overturning of Roe if he's adequately questioned on the topic. And that's where Democrats come in, right, Jess? I mean, what can they do here to drive home what Trump has unleashed and ensure that people understand that, quote unquote, let the states decide is a scam?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, letting the states decide is how you get somewhere like Texas putting a bounty on women. Like it's not just about like, what kind of abortion ban will you get? They're going to come up with some really creative, really awful ways to punish women for living their lives. And that's the point. Trump wants that. So what do Democrats need to do is keep talking about it, make sure that it's front and center, make sure that they cannot run away from their record. Because Dobbs, it was Trump's Supreme Court, but he wasn't necessarily president at the time. So there's a little education that has to happen. Luckily, we have a vice president who is extremely articulate on this topic. She is one of our best messengers on reproductive freedom, and she always has been. I say this as somebody who has been working in this particular field since like 2010. She has always been up there, and now she has an incredible platform in order to keep saying what she's saying. And the campaign, to their credit, is letting her do it. I wish that the president was a little bit more forthcoming on this issue. He's doing everything right, but it's clearly not one that he's comfortable talking about. I wish that he was out there more on it. Frankly, it's an absolute slam dunk of a winning issue for him. But we have other messengers too, and I think we're going to keep doing it. I also think people need to talk to their family and friends. Like, that's really big. If you are somebody who cares about this and you are listening to this podcast, let your own network know. You don't have to pick up the phone and call strangers. You don't have to door knock. You just let your own network know that their reproductive freedom is on the ballot this year. Maybe there's a ballot initiative in your state. Do all of your friends know about it? Probably not. Does everybody realize that even if they're in New York or Massachusetts or California, that if we ban mifepristone, it doesn't matter? Probably not. So we all need to keep talking about this. And sometimes it's not a comfortable issue to talk about. I think that's changed a lot as we've lost these rights and we've seen how fundamental and foundational they are. But we just got to keep talking about it until November. Absolutely.
I just want to float this. It's possible that Kamala Harris's platform to make this case might get a little bigger soon.
I don't know what you mean.
But we're not here to talk about that. Let's just put that aside for now. I want to ask you about this idea of networks and talking to friends. I think what we've seen, especially in the 2022 elections and in all the special elections in 2023, in which all sorts of surprises happened, there were surges in unlikely places. You had candidates in some cases in the South openly talking about their own abortion experience and winning special elections that way, Democrats. And yet there's sort of a school of punditry which is perpetually trying to argue that in the next election, enthusiasm, or I guess the energy on the issue, will wane. I don't know why there's that temptation. And I want to ask you about that. Is that something to actually fear? Do you expect the energy and the focus from this issue to be there in 2024? And corollary question, another school of pundit thought has it that in general elections, you have a kind of bigger turnout among a certain type of low propensity, not particularly educated, not affluent voter, and that for those types of voters, as opposed to highly committed partisans, it isn't that important an issue. How do you address all that? How do you think about it, and what are you experiencing?
All right. Well, so again, having worked in this particular brand of progressive politics for about 15 years now, I am extremely used to the pundit class telling me that this is not an important issue. So now that we're 2 years after we've lost Roe v. Wade, the fact that we are still being told that people might stop caring, at this point, all I can really do is laugh. And the idea that because you might have less money, you would care less about your ability to family plan, that doesn't hold water at all. Lots of low propensity voters, whatever we want to call them, however we want to denigrate them, frankly, They might not know the intricacies of the tax code. They might not understand that the earned income tax credit could apply to them. They might not get what has sunsetted and where. They understand the right to abortion. And the idea that any human adult in America doesn't is really insulting. Like, when we talk about kitchen table issues, and we use that phrase to mean issues that normal people understand, issues that you don't have to be a Beltway pundit to get, right? This is a kitchen table issue. Every couple in America has had this conversation, or they should have. Everybody with the capability of getting pregnant has thought about it. I'll tell you that much. 1 in 4 of us have had an abortion, which means everybody knows multiple people who have had them and probably loves somebody who has had one. So if we all start telling those stories, it becomes really, really hard to demonize the procedure, to make the people who seek that kind of care monstrous, because we can't all be monsters. Like, the vast majority of women who get abortions are already mothers, and they are doing it because they want to financially be able to care for the children they already have. Like, that's just not the stereotype that the right is putting out there. They have to lie because the reality is it's so unpopular.
I gotta say, it seems to me that type of low propensity voter should be reachable on this issue. If anything, if the communication is undertaken properly. These are young people who are a lot of them are in their 20s. They're starting to contemplate life plans, right? They're of reproductive age, as it were.
Yeah, and they're making those important decisions. I'm doing some work with the folks at the WNBA, women's basketball, and those women see this issue in a way it's kind of different than I'd contemplated it before. They don't choose what state they work in, and they put off their reproductive life until their career is like, they are planning. And there are lots of women, young women, who are planning to have kids later. There are a lot of young people who are freezing their eggs with the expectation that they will be able to have kids later. Like, this is about your own personal freedom to map out your own life. There's very little that matters more than those kinds of questions. And I'm not even talking, again, about the unwanted pregnancy of it all. I'm talking about the ability to decide what kind of life you get to have. That's what they're taking away. And that's what's very obvious. I do want to say one thing about in that 16-page doc that Trump put out, where they're going to pretend this is the platform because Project 2025 is too scary. It still says that he wants to ban abortion later in pregnancy. Like, that's still in that. Even in the cleanup document, they still couldn't get rid of this one. That's the most tragic, the meanest place to put a ban. And the more you tell those stories, and frankly, I always thought that we in the reproductive movement did the movement a disservice by not putting those stories front and center and allowing the other side to sort of fearmonger about it. The women who get abortions later in pregnancy, something has gone terribly wrong. Those are wanted pregnancies. Those are named kids. Those are painted nurseries, and some terrible medical mishap causes that pregnancy to not be viable. And so when you don't allow that woman to have an abortion, you are forcing her to carry her dead, wanted fetus for as long as the rest of her pregnancy lasts, if it doesn't kill her first. Think about the horror of that. Like, the fact that even they'll get rid of all of the others. We're not going to talk about any of the other bans, but we're going to keep that one. It really, really goes to show how divorced they are from the reality of it all and how powerful the stories of what this actually means are.
And by the way, I think that this is stuff that's easy to communicate in political ads. In fact, some of the most powerful and riveting political ads we've seen in this cycle feature women in that precise situation. I mean, talk about personalizing an issue and making it emotional and sort of demonstrating to people the stakes. It couldn't be clearer. One other point I wanted to raise with you, it also is a good issue for, influencers to talk to young voters about. It just seems like a clear-cut area where Democrats can really win the argument and fix some of their problems with some of their problem constituencies right now. Will they do it, though, Jess? Will Democrats come through? How confident are you feeling about this election generally, and how much of a difference can this issue really make?
This issue will make the difference. If we come through on this issue, we will win. If people really have the understanding of what is at stake here, we will win in November. That is on us, but that is also, again, I am deputizing everybody listening to your podcast. That is on all of us. Everybody needs to talk to their networks about this. I think anybody who says they're feeling confident is probably missing the stakes here. It's real hard to feel confident about something where if you don't make it happen, you wind up with fascism. And I worked on the campaign where we got more votes than Donald Trump. We got more votes than any presidential candidate in history, and we still didn't get it. So there's confidence, and then there's enough confidence that you can get through our electoral college, whatever voting purges the Republicans have done that we don't even know about yet, all of the disinformation that's going on out there, both foreign and domestic. You don't just have to win. You have to beat a game that's a little bit rigged. Like, that's just sort of how our democracy is set up. I'm not saying anyone's cheating. I'm just saying the Electoral College is not exactly fair. So you got to win, and then you got to win plus. So no, I think it would be silly to feel confident in any of that. But do I think that this is a winning issue more than anything else? Yes, 100%.
And on top of all that, there are all the problems with our information ecosystem, which is an utter catastrophe. The press is just, I think, in major ways, botching this election terribly. Just ask yourself whether your typical low information voter is even aware of the fundamental differences on this issue in particular. And the answer is going to be dispiriting. In fact, I think there's even some polling out there that shows that alarmingly large numbers of people blame Biden for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. How do you deal with this disinformation problem?
You got to get good information out there as loud as possible. That's why I keep talking. That's why I keep begging your listeners to do it too. Like, it's not just the pundits. People don't really trust pundits. People don't really trust politicians. They trust their friends and family. That's how you beat disinformation with good information. You don't beat disinformation by, putting it, like, refuting it fact for fact. Nobody cares. Nobody wants a fact check. If good, sane people are talking about the reality of life post-Roe, and the reality of life if Donald Trump becomes president again, that's what we need in order to do this. That's how you combat disinformation. It makes it a lot harder to believe the crazy stuff when you see it if you've already had a conversation with somebody about the reality of it. That's kind of how we have to get it done.
Well, I think that's exactly right and really well said. Jess McIntosh, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for talking about this.
Folks, make sure to check out some great new pieces we have up at TNR.com right now. Arthur Goldhammer looking at the results in France, in which the right was humiliated, but what's next is really far from clear. And Michael Tomasky telling Democrats that this is the week to say what they really think about Biden before it's too late. We'll see you all tomorrow. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.